Hey, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for joining us. Well, we're going to take a look at the youth mental health crisis, but first, Mark Levy from the Associated Press joins me, and we're going to talk about the big political stories of the week in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Back after these words.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
All right, Mark Levy with the Associated Press. We have a number of important topics to deal with, political topics for our state. Let's start out with the election coming up on November 5. We have mail-in ballots. That can get complicated. Explain mail-in ballots and what folks should be aware of.
So we've got about 2 million people who so far have applied for a mail-in ballot. Roughly 7 million people will probably vote, so that means about 1 in 3 are voting by mail.
That's a lot.
And there's court cases revolving around mail-in ballots because sending it in and completing it perfectly can be complicated. You need to sign the outside envelope, you need to date the outside envelope, and you need to put your ballot inside a secrecy envelope. And one of the court cases that's hot off the presses here is saying that if somebody didn't do one of those things and the county is going to reject their ballot, they should be able to vote provisionally on election day at their polling place. That's casting a provisional ballot which gets counted by the county because they're rejecting your mail-in ballot. So it was the Republican Party had objected to that. They said that there's nothing in state law that requires someone specifically to be able to vote provisionally if their mail-in ballot is rejected. The court said the law is here to help people vote, not to erect barriers to voting. So that is one thing that counties are going to have to absorb.
And that's a pretty big deal, isn't it? I mean,
it's a big deal.
Look at the numbers of people who now vote by mail.
Right. So if 2 million are voting by mail, it's quite possible that tens of thousands of these ballots will be rejected. We've seen it in the past elections under Pennsylvania's new mail-in voting law that tens of thousands of mail-in ballots are rejected because of these garden variety errors where you forget to put the inner envelope in the envelope with your ballot, you forget to sign the outer envelope, you could forget to date it.
And there's so many things that can go wrong when you do that, right? Mistakes that you can easily make.
Some people have written their birthday on it. Some people have written election day on it. You're supposed to write the date that you're signing the ballot and voting and mailing it. So, yeah, and so it's an important development, especially because we've seen two straight presidential elections divided by or separated by tens of thousands of votes. So 2016, 2020 were very close elections in Pennsylvania. This election between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, again, will be very close if the polls are correct.
All right, let's move on. I don't think there's any doubt that Pennsylvania is a critical state, often referred to as a battleground state. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Missouri, I won't go through a handful that are likely to determine who becomes the next president of the United States. So bring us up to date on the presidential campaign in our state.
So everyone says that the presidential campaign goes through Pennsylvania. Of the 7 battleground states, it has the most electoral votes. That makes it the most important state. Right. The biggest prize. Democrats have not won the White House without winning Pennsylvania since 1948. So it's particularly important for Democrats. And you can tell because Donald Trump and Kamala Harris and J.D. Vance and Tim Walz are here practically every day. One of them is in the state every day.
They've taken up residence, right? I joke about that.
They might as well buy real estate here because they're here almost every day. Kamala Harris did a town hall here. Donald Trump is in State College over the weekend. We've seen Elon Musk do a string of town halls supporting Donald Trump in Pennsylvania. The other thing is that it's ground zero to the whole McDonald's debate. Donald Trump did his McDonald's appearance in Pennsylvania because he's trying to make the claim that Kamala Harris didn't really work in McDonald's when she was growing up, and in college she says she did. It is ground zero to the whole Elon Musk campaign where he's giving away $1 million to people who go to one of his rallies, and law enforcement, we're hearing that the Department of Justice is curious about that and wondering if that breaks federal law by giving people $1 million to vote. So it is ground zero for everything going on in the presidential campaign right now.
Right. And, you know, obviously the legislature pulls out its election. The lawmakers have to stand for election this year. We have an important U.S. Senate race. Let's run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about the Pennsylvania United States Senate race. There is no doubt we have one of the most important U.S. Senate races in this cycle in the country. Back after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back. Well, Mark Levy is my guest. He's a writer with the Associated Press. He's at Timely Writer, by the way, if you want to connect with him and exchange a few tweets. Does that work? And we're talking about a number of very, very important political stories for our state. And I wouldn't be finished talking about him if I did not get into one of the most important U.S. Senate races in the entire United States. It is nationally covered between a guy named Casey and a guy named McCormick. Do I got that right?
You got that right.
Take it.
There's only a handful of U.S. Senate races that are really close. They will determine control of the chamber starting next year. And so in November's election in Pennsylvania, we have Bob Casey, who is the son of the former governor. He's running for his fourth term in the Senate. Yeah. He's being challenged by David McCormick, who left his job as CEO of the world's largest hedge fund to run for U.S. Senate. He ran unsuccessfully in 2022. Now he's back running against Casey this time. And the Cook Political Report, which is sort of a political Bible for inside the Beltway types in D.C., has moved this race to what they call a toss-up race. In other words, the polling is so close that it could go either way.
Could be won by either candidate.
Which is extraordinary. Bob Casey is perhaps the best-known politician in Pennsylvania. He's been in office for 30-some-odd years.
And his father was governor.
His father was governor. He is liked by people on both sides of the aisle, but it is a very close race. It's an important race. It's the second most expensive race in the United States right now, second only to Ohio's U.S. Senate race. And
it's one of those that are likely to decide control of the United States Senate between the Democrats and Republicans, correct?
Without a doubt. Republicans needed to pick up 2 seats. They're going to win one in West Virginia. Democrats aren't really contesting it, and all they need is to pick off one more, and if they pick off Pennsylvania's, that will almost certainly guarantee Republicans control of the U.S. Senate. And we've seen 2 debates between David McCormick and Bob Casey so far. They've advanced their message against each other. People are probably sick of seeing their ads on TV by now. They're paired with the presidential ads. And, yeah, it's coming down to the wire in the race.
Yeah, yeah. As you've been out covering it, is there a lot of interest in this race? You know, sometimes we have Senate races where there just isn't a lot of public interest. Has this one captured the attention of the people more than usual, you think?
This is a higher information race, without a doubt. Now, the presidential race sucks all the air out of the room, so there are voters out there who will vote in the race who don't know much about the candidates, and they're going to vote based on party ID or some other sort of identifier that is important to them. But you know, we're going to see $300 million spent on this race, at least. And so that goes a long way towards educating voters if indeed all they've seen are attack ads and don't know really the truth behind the attack ads.
Yeah. And it's nationally watched. I mean, typically Pennsylvania statewide elections get a lot of national attention, a lot of reporters covering it. You read stories about this race all over the country.
Without a doubt. And case in point is that if the race is going to cost over $300 million, most of that money is coming from national party organizations, outside super PACs who have donors from outside the state. So most of the money being spent in this race is from out of state, without a doubt.
All right, we're going to run to a break, and we come back. The youth mental health crisis, I'm going to talk to Angela Little about this. We're going to get into a whole bunch of other topics with her. Family digital wellness, limiting smartphone use during the school day. Boy, is that a hot issue.
It is a hot issue.
For parents and for children. We'll be back after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by
Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Welcome back. Well, we have a number of important topics to talk about with Angela Little. She's the president and CEO of the PA Family Support Alliance. I tell you, one of them that struck me, Angela, as critically important is the role that social media plays in the youth mental health crisis. I mean, we know about social media and many of its effects, and you're going to tell us how significant it really is.
Yeah. Well, the U.S. Surgeon General said that about 95% of our youth, ages 13 to 17, are on social media platforms. And out of that, a third say it's continual, which means they don't ever stop. They just move between the virtual world and seamlessly the physical world when they absolutely have to.
You mean when you're out somewhere and this young folks are just on their iPads and iPhones all the time?
All the time. All the time. So it's a really serious concern. And there's a lot of research that says this contributes to all kinds of depression, anxiety, social isolation.
Good point.
Yeah, many concerns for our youth.
What state and federal, is there a role for the state and federal governments in all of this?
Well, we think there is. You know, I think Pennsylvania has taken some important first steps. Senator Almond from Lancaster County championed legislation that allows school districts in Pennsylvania, it was signed by Governor Shapiro over the summer, to voluntarily enroll in programs where students can turn in their cell phones during the day, during the school year. And I think that's a great first step. So we get the screens away from kids during classroom time, so they're really engaging with, you know, other students and with the teachers and really focused on learning, which is what they're there for.
Yeah. I tell you, they have a way of sneaking around and getting on their phones and their iPads, don't they?
They sure do. We have a 15-year-old grandson, and we sometimes have weekends that we declare electronic free, and he will sneak it and go into the bathroom.
Oh, of course.
So, yeah, the kids are very skilled at this, and that speaks to the addiction and the dependency they have.
And there's also a role for government, state and federal governments, in terms of mitigating the youth mental health crisis, correct?
Yeah, for sure. There's been a bipartisan group, 14 attorneys from across the country. I think Pennsylvania is not part of that, but they filed lawsuits against TikTok. actually this month, because of the addiction issue of kids to their platform. And so they're looking at changes to that, particularly related to sextortion.
Right.
So we know that, when kids are on these platforms, there's all kinds of bullying that happens. There's sextortion. There's things that lead to then human sex trafficking. There's lots of really, really serious issues associated with it.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about the role that schools and parents can play to minimize the amount of time that young folks spend on their devices. We'll do that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania American Water. We keep life flowing across the Keystone State.
All right, we're chatting about a whole bunch of things related to young people, their wellness, their use of social media. My guest is Angela Little, and she's been on the program before. She's an expert in this whole area. She's with the PA Family Support. All right, well, I guess we ought to talk about the role that, can you beat this, schools and parents, how important are they?
Yeah, well, they're very pivotal. They spend, the most time with youth, no doubt, and probably school personnel more so than parents at most of the year. So we think, again, good first step with Senator Allment's legislation that Governor Shapiro signed that restricts phone usage and having phones during school days if school districts want to participate. We'd like to see that extend a little bit to school personnel being educated on really looking at social media and the virtual world from a health perspective, and that's where I'm going to with this with parents too. So what we know is
that's really critically important, I think.
Given
the extensive use of the social media by young people.
It is. So we can do restriction through legislation, but we know that restriction is never the sole answer. We have restriction on age, minimum age for tobacco use and for drinking, but what do we know teenagers do? They smoke and they drink. So we have to look at it from a health focus point. We'd like to see parents really get involved in learning about social media and learning about the virtual world.
Good point.
We call that family digital wellness at Pennsylvania Family Support Alliance. So I want to make sure that your viewers understand they can go to pafsa.org and look at our Family Digital Wellness Initiative.
Okay.
It's a one-stop shop. And so what we want folks to learn really is, number one, what they model is important for kids. So don't sit at the dinner table with your cell phone. Don't go out to dinner with your cell phone, checking Facebook, texting with folks. Have times in your family where it's just off limits.
Don't carry this with you all the time. I got it on the screen. Don't carry that with you all the time.
Don't carry it with you all the time.
Yeah, it's a good point.
But look at some parental controls. Understand the platforms that your kids are using. Understand what the threats really are. And again, that's found on our website at pafsa.org.
Now, Child Protective Services, there's a role for Pennsylvania state government in this protection, correct?
Well, I think so. I think that some of the restrictions legislatively directed is important. I think state government can get involved in really promoting, again, a health lens, a positive health lens to the whole idea of the virtual world and social media. No doubt about that. But I think we have to pay attention, too, to what our data says in the state. For instance, we had 115 near fatalities in 2022. Most of those were because of a lack of parental supervision.
Yeah, it's a good point.
In some case, kids are just kind of holed up in their rooms or in the corner of a family room on their devices where parents are using it as childcare. But in more extreme cases, the lack of parental supervision means kids are getting into
And state government has got involved in supplying resources necessary to limit smartphone use during the school days.
They have. It is a voluntary program for the school districts. There are bags that kind of conceal the phones that kids check in when they come into the classroom and they get when they leave. So it's a good first step.
Yeah. And there's important state and federal legislation dealing with parental supervision, correct?
Yeah, not really the parental supervision. I mean, lack of parental supervision is a form of child neglect. If a child is harmed, that's something that, obviously comes up in our data. So we want to pay attention to that. The bottom line is parents need to get in the game, and it's overwhelming.
But you get when you don't have parental supervision, young people are harmed by that. Is that correct?
They are, and sometimes it's just they're with their devices, but sometimes they're getting into over-the-counter medication or prescription meds, sometimes unsecured firearms. So we want to pay attention to all of this and look at really just trying to engage parents as much as we can, and school personnel, of course, on how to really help kids now, our youth. It's not going to go back. We're not going to have less technology. So how do we really integrate that into life from a health perspective?
That's great. Now, there is a Family Digital Wellness Initiative from PFSA. Talk about that.
Correct. It's really a framework and a guiding source for parents to begin to learn about the virtual world and look at developing a family digital wellness plan for their families that's very individualized based upon how old the kids are, what social media interests the kids have, to begin to monitor that, to learn about parental controls, and then to establish some rules within their home that just becomes a normal part of day-to-day life.
I tell you, when you deal with parents, and I'm obviously one, it can be difficult, can't it? I mean, it's not always easy to deal with them when you're dealing with subject like wellness.
It's very hard.
Because it's so personal.
It's so personal.
It's so family.
It's so family, it's so personal, and it's easy for all of us as parents and especially grandparents to feel overwhelmed and a little intimidated by the technology. But PFSA's Family Digital Wellness Initiative can help with that. And so what we want to say to folks is, don't be afraid. It's just like drugs. It's just like smoking. It's another thing that we have to learn about.
Is this basically Family Digital Wellness? Is that basically initiative in informing people?
Informing them. They can log on there and see what all the current up-to-date daily media clips are, what's going on, what should they be aware of, and then our guiding source to help them develop their own family digital wellness plan.
Yeah, I mean, this seems to me extremely important given the independence that young people have today.
It's not going to go anywhere, so we have to learn how to live with it.
It's not going to go anywhere, you don't think so?
It's not going to go anywhere, so we have to learn.
Is it getting worse?
Absolutely it is. Go into a restaurant and see when you see a family of four, are they sitting there talking to each other, or do they each have their phones open? You will always find some families that just have their phones.
All right, well, you have an assignment, and that is to keep us up to date on this. You will do that.
You got it.
All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.